Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
The jury in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial heard the first full day of testimony today, and it was graphic and it was disturbing. Maxwell is charged with recruiting and transporting girls for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse between 1994 and 2004. The first of 4 of Epstein's victims expected to testify took the stand today. The witness using the pseudonym Jane went into detail about the abuse that she allegedly suffered at the hands of the defendant and Jeffrey Epstein, starting when she was just 14. At first, she talked about the grooming process, saying, quote, "They made me feel special by spending time with me, talking to me, asking me what I was doing in school. They took me to the movies, took me shopping, took me on field trips. It changed when the abuse started happening." She then described the abuse itself. Quote, "What would Maxwell typically do? She, along with others, would just start taking their clothes off. Jeffrey would get on the massage table. It just turned into this orgy." Then the prosecutor asked, "Who was most frequently in the room when you had sexual contact with Jeffrey Epstein when you were 14 years old?" Answer, Ghislaine Maxwell. But the defense fighting back on the cross-examination before they concluded for the day, asking why she hadn't mentioned Maxwell earlier. Quote, "In those 20 years, you never mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell sexually abused you." "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I was very reluctant to give horrible details." "You talked to them about Epstein?" "Yes." "Did you talk about Ghislaine Maxwell?" "I don't know." Maxwell's pled not guilty. Her lawyers arguing that she's effectively being made a scapegoat for Jeffrey Epstein. Joining us now is Adam Klasfeld, the managing editor for Law and Crime. He's been inside the courtroom covering the case. Adam, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so this is powerful stuff as this witness testified.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's testimony that was promised from the very beginning of the case. You had the prosecutor saying, just as trial began, "I'm going to tell you the story of a girl named Jane." And today, Jane testified on day 2 of the trial. And she told a powerful and emotional story of her abuse. You read some of the quotes right now, and it got even more detailed and more graphic. We've been hearing about some of what Epstein's victims had said in the past and what Ghislaine Maxwell's accusers had been saying in the past, and there were some commonalities of stories of massages that escalated into sexual assault. And here, there were, in accordance with a lot of the other testimony that we've been hearing in the past in civil cases and things like that, accusations of the use of sex toys. Now, this witness said it went into those details, and it got graphic. Her voice cracked on numerous occasions when she was recounting her allegations of abuse. And at a number of points that it's been reported from the pool reports that Maxwell, watching this, took deep breaths. Her breaths got deeper when she started testifying as to her first encounters. So it was powerful testimony, right?
Because the theory here is that Maxwell is grooming her, right? She's trusting Maxwell. Right?
And it's twofold. It's grooming, and it's also allegations of hands-on assault. She accused her from the witness stand of fondling her, you read one of the quotes about how things escalated into an orgy. She placed Maxwell on the scene of that. And that's what prosecutors had promised from the earliest stages of the case, that this is partly a story about grooming and partly allegations of direct abuse.
Because it is critical for prosecutors to not just implicate Jeffrey Epstein, right? Because that's exactly what the defense wants. The defense wants them to just talk about Epstein, talk about Epstein. For the prosecutors, they've got to show this isn't just about Epstein.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, yesterday was the opening statements, and the opening statement from the defense attorney was, she's a stand-in for Epstein. She's a lightning rod. That was the theme that the defense attorney kept hammering. And her line, the opening line for the prosecution, as I said, was, I'll tell you a story about Jane. The opening line for the defense was, ever since Eve was said to have tempted Adam with the apple, women have been blamed for the misdeeds of men. So she's trying to shift the blame to Jeffrey Epstein, depict her client as a...
And the cross-examination, the first line of questioning was effective, right? In the sense that you hadn't mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell in the 20 years since it's happened.
And that pivots to the key theme of the defense and something that's going to go ahead as trial proceeds, which is the defense is going to try to undermine memory. And there was a back and forth on that.
Yeah.
Now, remember, the allegations of this indictment are between 1995 and 2004. So they're going to try to undermine the accuser's memories. They're going to try to paint the accusers as financially motivated.
Right. So it's both wrong and lying. It's an interesting split that they're arguing both things. All right. Adam Klasfeld, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry we made you sit there with that thing on your ear, that thing coming out of your ear. It wasn't your fault. It was our fault. Come on. Sorry that we made you do that. Adam, good to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Welcome back. A woman who was born into privilege, power, honor, wealth is standing trial in New York on charges that could send her to prison for life. Ghislaine Maxwell is accused of finding, enticing, and grooming underage girls for her sometime boyfriend and longtime employer, Jeffrey Epstein. We've all heard that name. And if you think their relationship couldn't possibly be boiled down to the one sentence I just read, you're right. Vicky Ward knows that relationship and both of those people as well as anyone ever has or will. She is a best-selling author and investigative journalist whose docuseries Chasing Ghislaine premieres tonight on Discovery Plus. I've seen clips. It looks awesome. I can't wait to watch the whole thing. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. Let's start with the first question that I really had. Why the title Chasing Ghislaine? Chasing, a very interesting word there.
Well, do you remember, Brian, after Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell, the question of where was Ghislaine Maxwell dominated our headlines for a year until she was found in quite dramatic circumstances, living sort of on the cliffs up in New Hampshire. But I also think that long before that, really all through the period of her life in New York, which is where I first met her in the 1990s, she was an enigma. She was someone who would breeze in to the kind of British expat kind of parties that I attended. You know, the British expat world in New York is a small one. We all know each other. And she would sort of name drop important politicians, rich people she'd been spending time with, traveling with, and then she would disappear again. She was always this sort of exotic figure, and you were left wondering, what does she actually do all day? Is it really this jet-set extraordinary life? It was curious. So that is why it's called Chasing Ghislaine. It's a question, who is this woman?
Yeah, absolutely. There is this mystery about her. I mean, we've heard so much about Jeffrey Epstein over the years, and there's really enough evidence to say, I mean, he's a pretty bad guy. We've seen all the evidence and heard from the victims. But with Ghislaine, there's always been this sort of question, was she also abused by Epstein? Was she, or was she also as bad as he was?
Right. So to sort of push back a little bit, one of the reasons I wanted to make this documentary when Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested was precisely because I knew, given that I had been assigned to write a very deep dive profile of Jeffrey Epstein back in 2002, I knew that his story was a lot more complicated than just being a sex offender. As horrific as that is, there was much more to Jeffrey Epstein. He was a master manipulator. He was a con artist. He was an embezzler. He was possibly an arms dealer. He was probably a spy. And he was a math teacher. And I knew that Ghislaine Maxwell held the key to possibly unlocking the riddle of who he really was, because the real story is much more complicated and it involves many more people.
She was a kind of fireball of energy, a real live wire, that it felt exciting to be in her company. She told fantastically funny stories. She had quite a raucous sense of humor, lots of self-deprecating humor. And her conversation was sort of peppered with famous names of, extraordinarily powerful people.
And my guest is journalist, author, and commentator Vicky Ward, whose three-part docuseries on Ghislaine Maxwell debuts tonight on Discovery Plus. I want to ask you, Vicky, her trial now, the sex trafficking charges, you seem to know this situation better than anyone. How do you think this is going to play out? Do you think she's guilty?
Listen, she's pled not guilty. It's up for a jury to decide that, Brian. But what I think we do know, and I know from my reporting, is what her defense strategy is going to be. And past is prologue. What I mean by that is that when Ghislaine Maxwell's father died in controversial circumstances, her two brothers were charged of helping their dead father basically rob his former employees of their pension funds to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, this was in the early 1990s in London. Nobody before that trial thought that Ghislaine Maxwell's two brothers were going to be acquitted. But their defense was to say that they themselves were victims of a brutal father. Their own mother took the stand and said that. And I think you're going to see Ghislaine Maxwell say that she was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Kevin and Ian Maxwell also shredded the credibility of the government's witnesses. And again, I think you're going
sorry to interrupt you, Vicky, but I think it'll also be interesting to see, how this all plays out. Obviously, her lawyers have said that she's only being tried because Epstein cannot. So thank you so much, Vicky. Sorry to cut you off. Can't wait to watch the entire thing. It's streaming now on Discovery Plus.
Welcome back. More disturbing testimony in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial today. Maxwell is charged with recruiting and transporting girls for Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse between 1994 and 2004. The first of four alleged Epstein victims expected to testify back on the witness stand. Using the pseudonym Jane, she faced a fierce cross-examination today from the defense. This one day after she went into detail about the abuse she says she suffered at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, starting she was just 14. Her testimony yesterday implicated Maxwell not only for grooming her, but also participating in the abuse. Today, the defense went after Jane, attacking her memory as well as her credibility. They took her on about why she didn't mention Maxwell's role in the years after the incident, including the first time she now says she met both Maxwell and Epstein together. Quote, "You told your brother Brian you'd been approached by Epstein. Told your brother nothing about Maxwell being there? I don't recall." And then they challenged her on her testimony yesterday about Maxwell's alleged role in the sex acts. Quote, "It is true that you do not recall Ghislaine Maxwell ever touching you." That's not true, she said. You spoke to the government in December 2019 with your lawyers there, and you told them at that time that you were not sure whether Maxwell ever touched you during these encounters. I don't recall. The defense even going after the accuser for crying on the stand, bringing up her years as an actress. Quote, "You've played a protective mom, got into a car crash, had cancer, was stalked by a serial killer, took down a Mexican drug cartel. You played a prostitute." She wrote, she said, "Not my favorite storyline. You're able to cry on command?" Not always. That's not how it works. There's also a brief mention of former President Donald Trump, the defense asking, "Mr. Epstein introduced you to Donald Trump, correct?" She said, yes. There was no mention of any wrongdoing by the former president. Then the prosecution got to the question of the witness again. They first asked about those meetings with the government in 2019 and why she couldn't recall more. Quote, "Because I was standing in a room full of strangers and telling them the most shameful, deepest secrets that I've been carrying around with me my whole life." Then they talked about the money she received as part of a settlement, the defense suggesting that there could be a financial motive for her. Quote, "Would you give that money back if it meant that you weren't abused as a kid? I wish I would have never received that money in the first place because of what happened." Joining us now is someone who may know more about this story and case than anyone in America. Vicky Ward, New York Times bestselling author, and the host of the podcast Chasing Ghislaine. She has been inside the courtroom. Vicky, good to see you. So what did you make of the cross-examination of Jane today?
I thought it was incredibly effective, Dan. In fact, the people around me were all actually questioning each other afterwards as to why the government hadn't prepared Jane better. After all, what Laura Menninger, the defense attorney, was doing was raising inconsistencies between what Jane had told the FBI and the government in the past 2 or 3 years with what she had said on the stand. The government has been in possession of those notes for months and months and months. You know, they must have known that the defense was going to poke holes at every single inconsistency. Why didn't they do a better job?
Yeah. And so is this potentially telling us that there's more to come of this? Meaning when the other accusers take the witness stand, with some of them, there's a long history there. And I think that there's a good sense of the sort of attacks that are coming. Are some people inside the courtroom suggesting that this is the beginning of the case falling apart?
I think that, look, if you're the defense, you're going to open with your strongest argument. If you're the prosecution, you'd think you would open with the best you've got. And so far, frankly, the government's performance, the witnesses they've called have been bewildering. Larry Visosky, Epstein's pilot of 30 years, was their opening witness, and his testimony was frankly much more helpful to Maxwell than it was for the government. He talked about what a nice person she was, that he'd never seen any underage women on Epstein's planes in 30 years, that he'd never seen any sexual activity on the planes, that he trusted his 2 young daughters with Maxwell. The government has been, the defense, Dan, has been very clear that their job here is to attack these government witnesses on 3 M's: memory, manipulation, and money. And yes, you're going to see them do this again and again and again. And today it was very, very effective.
So quickly, what was the reference to Donald Trump about today, and how is it relevant to the case?
Well, that remains to be seen. A number of men have been mentioned, and have a number of women, actually. We heard some female Christian first names coming in today that were surprising. It's clearly all they're laying a groundwork, and we're going to see how the jigsaw puzzle fits together as we go. But you can be sure Donald Trump's name is going to come up again. How and why? Don't know yet.
All right. Vicky Ward, the podcast is called Chasing Ghislaine. I'd also highly recommend anyone to check out her Substack. Vicky is one of the greatest journalists in the country, and she's just started a Substack, which I highly recommend. Vicky, thank you. Good to see you.
With us now, Larry Levine, founder and director of Wall Street Prison Consultants, U.S. District Court-appointed sentence mitigation expert. Good to see you, as always. Look, it's an impressive list of grievances. Are we surprised?
No, I mean, the rich, the famous, whoever, they expect the staff to cater to them. And when they get into a prison, they find out that they're a no one. And your list is a little short. It's 900 grievances, not 400. And it started back when she was a pre-trial or pre-sentence detainee at the detention center in New York. And she keeps like a little journal. I talked to some people in the prison just before this broadcast, some inmates that filled me in, and she's generally writing a grievance every day, and she's following up on those grievances with a new grievance. So it's a never-ending line of complaints, and that's where I guess they think that she's a Karen, because she's complaining about staff on the grievances, but the inmates, she fronts the inmates off. So she's kind of ratting people out. And in a prison, there's two things that people hate. Someone that's a rat and someone that's a child molester. And this lady can't hide because everyone knows what she's there for.
Yeah. Look, as we understand it, it's 400 about the current prison, and then you've got the ones from the previous prison.
Carryover.
Yeah, same rate, one a day. This is my question, okay? What's her game here? You know, this is a woman who is a master at manipulating the system and manipulating young girls and everything else, going through everything. What's the game? Is it to get a lighter sentence, or is it to get moved?
Okay. These are what's called administrative remedies. This goes through the Bureau of Prisons grievance process. She's filing what's called a BP-9. It goes to the institution. It's then appealed up to a BP-10 to the Federal Bureau of Prisons regional office. Then it goes to an 11. It goes to Washington, to the central office. At that point, she can actually file a habeas corpus lawsuit in the federal prison that has jurisdiction, the federal court that has jurisdiction over the prison. But this has nothing to do with her sentence. She's more or less complaining about the conditions of her confinement. It's completely different. She doesn't really have an end game here other than complaining. And she's got other issues because from what I've been told, the inmates don't like her. She doesn't shower. Maybe once every 4 days, she wipes herself down with those, I don't know, like big diaper pads or something. The other inmates make her leave her shoes outside because they stink. And it reached the point that over the holidays, the inmates, they created like a song for her, like, Ghislaine, Ghislaine, don't be a bitch. Everybody knows you're a whining snitch. And when people come up with something like this...
we've had a lot of things happen on the show. I've yet to hear anybody sing a prison jingle. So that's a new one.
It was a new one.
Larry, I got to get you on this real quick. Tallahassee amenities, it's a whole list. This is like camp fed. Everything's great. Is there any way to pressure her to actually be a snitch on all the people who she was providing girls for and all of Epstein's black book and everything else?
Well, they could threaten to give her more time. Remember, she's not at a camp, okay? She's at a place where there's two fences, there's a roving patrol of cops with machine guns while waiting to light people up if they try to go over the fence. But she's living in dormitory living. People with 20 years and less are there. Now, they could, for whatever reason, boost her up in custody, stick her in a medium security prison where she's there with bank robbers and killers, major drug dealers, and they could lock her in a cell 23 hours a day.
I got to run. Yeah, I got to run. But, yeah, imagine the list of complaints with that. Larry, thank you. I got to run.
The defense began its case in the federal sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime confidant and alleged co-conspirator. 4 alleged victims testified with often heart-wrenching accounts of what they claim Epstein and Maxwell did to them. But the cross-examinations were tough, often highlighting inconsistencies in their accounts. Today, one of the defense's star witnesses took the stand, Elizabeth Loftus, a psychologist and so-called false memory expert. She's testified in hundreds of trials, including a number of high-profile, controversial ones like O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein. The defense hopes that her testimony might help convince the jurors that the memories of Epstein's accusers are unreliable. Maxwell's lawyers contend that her accusers have misremembered their experiences or invented them with her and Epstein, and in some cases changed their stories to better fit a narrative being pushed by others. Loftus walked the jury through the stages of memory. She also testified that people can remember things differently from how they actually happened because she said memory isn't like a recording device. Quote, we don't just record events and play them back like an idea. She told the jury we often take bits and pieces of our memories and construct what feels like a recollection. Things started off on the wrong foot for Maxwell's attorneys after federal judge Allison Nathan denied the defense's request to have 3 witnesses testify anonymously on her behalf. But then the defense's first witness, her former personal assistant, Kimberly Espinoza, downplayed Maxwell's role in Epstein's life. Espinoza, who worked for Maxwell from 1996 to 2002, called her former boss Epstein's estate manager and testified that Maxwell never lived with Epstein during the time she worked for Maxwell. Espinoza, who also previously worked as an assistant for Epstein's lawyers, Also described the deceased convicted sex offender as a giver and someone who gave generously to charity, which probably didn't help with her credibility. When it came to Epstein's accusers, Espinosa said she saw nothing during her 6 years working for Maxwell that pointed to either Maxwell or Epstein behaving inappropriately with underage girls. But on cross-examination, she admitted she didn't work out of Epstein's homes, where the accusers have alleged the abuse took place. Now, many thought Maxwell would take the stand in her own defense. I kind of thought she would. And while it's still unclear if she will, her lawyers were given until tomorrow to decide, but it's looking less likely since Judge Nathan said to expect closing arguments to begin on Monday. Back with us again, the co-host of the nationally syndicated program Law and Crime Daily, attorneys Terry Austin and Brian Buckmeyer. Terry, any chance you think Ghislaine Maxwell will still testify?
Not because of the timing. I think she's going to want to testify. I think she probably should testify to talk about what was happening, because remember, this is basically she said, she said. And so I think if she testified, it would definitely help. Cross-examination would be horrible, though.
Yeah.
But because of the timing, I think she probably won't. There's no way you could get finished with both the direct and the cross-examination. So it doesn't look like she's going to.
Brian, you agree?
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. I actually kind of slightly disagree with you, Dan, initially, that I didn't think she was ever going to testify. She would have been bombarded with every why under the sun, and I think that would have been detrimental to her. And so I kind of expected her not to testify and really rely on her defense team and poking holes here, there, and everywhere to kind of help carry this case for her.
Well, I will tell you that based on the cross-examination, I haven't been in court, but I have been reading transcriptions coming out of court. It does seem the cross-examinations have been very effective of these 4 women who are testifying, and I think that may be playing a role here in the decision not to have her testify. Brian, do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, absolutely. Every defense attorney worth their salt will tell you that from the time you know you're going to go to trial, you prep your clients for the possibility of testifying. In some cases, you have to, as we talked about earlier in the show with Kim Potter. In some cases, you don't. In some cases, you're on the fence. And I think what we're seeing here is when you're kind of sort of maybe on the fence and the cross-examinations feel like they're going your way, while you have prepped your client, this is a time that I would turn to my client and say, you know what? Maybe you don't need to testify. Maybe there's too much damage that can be done.
Do you agree with my characterization of the cross-examinations? I mean, I think that people who aren't watching the trial that closely aren't getting the fact that there have been real problems with the prosecution, right?
Right. I mean, the prosecution tore up Jane, sorry to say. The fact that at one point she said, well, I, basically have not seen Maxwell and Epstein together, and I don't remember the first time. And then, on the stand, she's now saying that she remembers the first time, she knew where she was, she knew what was going on. And I think that that is saying that her credibility is not that strong.
Particularly when we're talking about reasonable doubt. Brian, what to make of this decision by the judge not to let these 3 witnesses testify anonymously?
I think it was absolutely correct. I think the judge themselves said that this is unprecedented. And let me step back and say why. Typically, you keep someone anonymous when they are a victim of some sort of crime. There's some sort of mental or physical fear of recourse that could happen to them. But when the judge pressed the defense as to why these witnesses should fall into the category of victims who testify anonymously, there wasn't really any leg to kind of stand on as to why they need to be anonymous. So I think this was a correct decision.
We know why, right? We know why. They don't want to be associated with Ghislaine Maxwell. They right? I mean, they don't want to be in the paper. They don't want people knowing that they were part of the defense of Ghislaine Maxwell. I get it. Anyway. All right. Terry Austin and Brian Buckmeyer, it is great to have you both here. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you again soon.
Eventually from prison, she'll still have somewhat of a life potentially in front of her. Does she have friends? Will she be counting on the support of friends whose secrets she may still be trying to protect? Prince Andrew, obviously, among them. She also has mounting legal fees. She's been involved in a legal dispute with some of the lawyers who represented her in a criminal case and who had represented her in earlier civil cases over non-payment. So, from her perspective, if you take her at face value, she says she doesn't have money. So she does need the support of the wealthy friends. And so that itself is a reason why she might be staying silent.
So
she's going to do this interview. Now all of a sudden, the idea is that she's got people who she has dirt on who are paying her legal fees, may have some arrangement for when she gets out of jail. Are we going to ever know the truth? Because Prince Andrew's the biggest name, but there were some really big time people involved in this. Big financiers, titans of industry, politicians who really have a lot to lose if she tells even half of her story, right?
No, this is truly this was a global network of people. The wealthiest people, the most powerful people in the world, multiple world leaders, multiple business titans. The list goes on and on and on of people who were connected to Epstein. And we may learn some of those secrets in a lawsuit that's currently being brought by some of Epstein's victims against some of the banks that Epstein did business with. Although, who knows? We're still fighting to get documents released from a civil case that Ghislaine Maxwell herself was involved in, where years after it was resolved, some of the people who were named in those documents are still fighting desperately to keep them secret. So there are, the people who are on the other side of this, who are trying to keep these things secret, have essentially endless resources at their disposal to prevent these things from coming out.
It's wild. Ben, stay on the case. If we do learn a lot of stuff, it's going to be fascinating. I think almost more interesting if we don't learn things and what she clearly is trying to protect. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, joining us now to discuss the verdict is attorney Rachel Fiset. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us at such a last minute.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so what is your initial reaction to this verdict? I mean, at one point, we thought that COVID, because of the rapid spread of Omicron, was going to delay jurors finally, being able to reach a verdict. So what's your reaction?
I think it's a good thing that this verdict came back before there was any kind of coronavirus breakout, any kind of thing within the courtroom, within the jury, within the lawyers. So this was a very good verdict, a timely verdict. The jury had a lot of testimony to get through. It was testimony they appeared to want to read and really mull over, but they did it just in time before any kind of spread before the new year and a break.
All right, so Maxwell found guilty of 5 of 6 counts. I want to talk about that count that she was found not guilty of. That was enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Can you maybe explain that charge for us a bit and why jurors would have opted, of all the charges, to find her not guilty on this one?
That's a pretty specific charge that, that had certain elements that would have required specific knowledge of a specific event. And it appears the jurors decided against kind of that specificity. If you can remember, some of this stuff is very old, as the statute of limitations was given a longer period of time because these were children at the time, and they give the children time to become of age before they are required to testify in these kinds of charges in these kinds of cases. So a lot of this testimony was old, and I think that the jurors just didn't find the specificity that they needed as it related to the enticement charge.
All right, so Rachel, talk about the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell did not testify in her own defense. Do you think that was a smart move? Obviously, hindsight always 20/20, but what are your thoughts on that?
It's really difficult to put a defendant on the stand. I think specifically in this instance, it would have been really difficult for her defense team to put her on the stand and to not suborn perjury would be my guess. So I think that it was the right call not to have her testimony, as she likely could not have given truthful testimony that would have supported her defense. The facts seem pretty clear. That she was very close to Jeffrey Epstein, and it would have been hard to show otherwise. Even if the words came out of her own mouth, it would have. I think it would have set her up to either lie or actually, hurt her own defense.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of conspiracy theories that have swirled, particularly since Epstein's suicide in custody. The defense claiming that Maxwell was being used as a scapegoat for his crimes, but, the jury found her culpable for her role in this as well.
she was just so close to him. I mean, that is part of the prosecution's case, was just to show how very close she was in all of the activities that he did. And it would have virtually been impossible in some of these instances for her not to have known and aided and done the acts that she was accused of doing. So I think that is part of the case. That is a part that is undeniable. She couldn't have denied it. And this is what the jury ultimately came to was, yes, maybe he was the main perpetrator, but she was right there with him, aiding him along. And in a lot of ways, this is the case that was never proven against him. The prosecutors got the ability to prove it against her.
All right, well, Rachel, one more question for you. Let's talk about sentencing here. We knew, throughout all of this, she faced potentially up to 70 years in prison. Obviously, no criminal record up until this point. Kind of walk us through what you predict as far as sentencing here.
I heard the defense team will put on all the evidence that they don't think she was the main perpetrator, that she was in many ways along for the ride. They will show what her background is without any kind of prior convictions, without prior crimes. They will try to make her look like a model citizen, and that she was not the main actor in these events. And they may even show that she was under his spell, or that she didn't do this on her own. As far as the prosecutors go, they will make this look like the sex crime case that it is, that really without her help, that these events could not have happened, that she was convicted of this, that this is child sex trafficking. I mean, this is very major. I don't think she will get a light sentence. This to me feels like she will spend a good amount of time in jail, if not the rest of her life.
And Rachel, one more thing. I have to imagine the defense immediately is going to be filing an appeal here.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I don't see immediately grounds for appeal in this case, but she has a lot of money. Likely she can spend some money on the appeal, of course, but I don't see this as a case that would be overturned.
Rachel Fiset, we appreciate so much you joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your insight.
Two high-profile cases coming to an end this past week. On Wednesday, British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of helping lure teenage girls to be sexually abused by the late Jeffrey Epstein. The verdict capped a month-long trial in which 4 women described being abused as teens in the 1990s and early 2000s, all of them claiming to have been groomed by Maxwell before they were forced to massage Epstein at one of his many homes. Maxwell faces the likelihood of decades behind bars, but may appeal her conviction. And a life-changing turn of events. Colorado's governor shortening the prison sentence for a truck driver convicted in a deadly crash. Rohel Aguilera Medeiros was originally sentenced to 110 years for causing an explosive pileup in 2019 that killed 4 people. He was resentenced to 10 years in prison on Thursday following a public outcry. Allison Treasel is a criminal defense attorney and joins us now live to talk about both of these cases. Happy New Year to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the Maxwell trial. This was a big day for the dozens of women who never got to see Epstein pay for what he did and pay for his crimes. So the focus turned to her. And that really was the crux of her defense, right? That she was a scapegoat for Epstein's crimes. And if he were still alive, do you think that she would have faced the same charges and the same punishment that she's looking at now?
I absolutely do. And here's the thing. Her defense was not a very strong one because the conspiracy charges alone basically say, look, if you assisted and you committed one overt act, you didn't even need to commit the criminal offense because you were part of the conspiracy. But what Ghislaine Maxwell did for decades, and so when you talk about these victims not receiving justice, this was decades in the making. She not only groomed them, she recruited them, she enticed them. She was the madam here. And this jury, which comprised of 6 men and 6 women, felt that her alone, not as Epstein's scapegoat, but her alone was responsible for these crimes. And The girls talked about actual sexual abuse suffered at the hands of Miss Maxwell.
And she plans to appeal. She has that option. So the question now, right, is will she cooperate with the government? And if she does, will prosecutors bring down more of these people involved in this sex ring? Because it's clear that it wasn't just her. She had lieutenants, Maxwell did, and they all got that sweetheart deal from Alex Acosta, who was a prosecutor at the time in South Florida all those years ago.
Well, what's interesting is the question asked for me all weekend was, what if she wants to turn these big names, the alleged involvement of Prince Andrew or the alleged involvement of Donald Trump or the alleged involvement of Bill Clinton, what if she wants to turn on them now? I think it's probably too little too late, okay? That should have happened, if it was gonna happen at all, before this case went to trial. This judge, she's looking at a maximum of 65 years. She's looking at 40 years alone for the sex trafficking. And these victims very much feel that she was as involved and as culpable as Jeffrey Epstein. And a lot of people, when you talk about this case, they say she was the linchpin that allowed it to happen. So Epstein had the money, but Maxwell had the connection. Some of these girls testified that they felt like they trusted her and she was like their mother. So I don't think anything she says now, once a jury has reached its verdict, is going to change the decades-long prison sentence, which I believe the judge is going to give her.
Jury reaching a verdict in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. That is Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend. NewsNation's Rudabeh Shabazi joins us live with more details. Rudabeh.
Nicole, the British socialite was accused of grooming young girls to be sexually abused by Epstein. He's the billionaire financier, of course, who killed himself in prison in 2019. Maxwell being found guilty on 5 of the 6 federal sex crime charges. The only charge she was found not guilty on was enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Maxwell was arrested in July of last year and now faces up to 70 years in prison, the rest of her life. The 12-member jury had deliberated for 6 days. Maxwell did not testify in her own defense, and her defense claims she was being used as a scapegoat for Epstein's crimes. But prosecutors say Maxwell manipulated the victims and caused deep and lasting harm to them.
All right, Rudabeh, thank you so much for that. All right, joining us now to discuss the verdict is attorney Rachel Fiset. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us at such a last minute.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so what is your initial reaction to this verdict? I mean, at one point, we thought that COVID, because of the rapid spread of Omicron, was going to delay jurors finally, being able to reach a verdict. So what's your reaction?
I think it's a good thing that this verdict came back before there was any kind of coronavirus breakout, any kind of thing within the courtroom, within the jury, within the lawyers. So this was a very good verdict, a timely verdict. The jury had a lot of testimony to get through. It was testimony they appeared to want to read and really mull over, but they did it just in time before any kind of spread, before the new year and a break.
All right, so Maxwell found guilty of 5 of 6 counts. I want to talk about that count that she was found not guilty of. That was enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Can you maybe explain that charge for us a bit and why jurors would have opted, of all the charges, to find her not guilty on this one?
That's a pretty specific charge that, that had certain elements that would have required specific knowledge of a specific event. And it appears the jurors decided against kind of that specificity. If you can remember, some of this stuff is very old, as the statute of limitations was given a longer period of time because these were children at the time, and they give the children time to become of age before they are required to testify in these kinds of charges in these kinds of cases. So a lot of this testimony was old, and I think that the jurors just didn't find the specificity that they needed as it related to the enticement charge.
All right, so Rachel, talk about the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell did not testify in her own defense. Do you think that was a smart move? Obviously, hindsight always 20/20, but what are your thoughts on that?
It's really difficult to put a defendant on the stand. I think specifically in this instance, it would have been really difficult for her defense team to put her on the stand, and to not suborn perjury would be my guess. So I think that it was the right call not to have her testimony, as she likely could not have given truthful testimony that would have supported her defense. The facts seem pretty clear. That she was very close to Jeffrey Epstein, and it would have been hard to show otherwise. Even if the words came out of her own mouth, it would have, I think it would have set her up to either lie or actually, hurt her own defense.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of conspiracy theories that have swirled, particularly since Epstein's suicide in custody. The defense claiming that Maxwell was being used as a scapegoat for his crimes, but, the jury found her culpable for her role in this as well.
She was just so close to him. I mean, that is part of the prosecution's case, was just to show how very close she was in all of the activities that he did. And it would have virtually been impossible in some of these instances for her not to have known and aided and done the acts that she was accused of doing. So I think that is part of the case. That is a part that is undeniable. She couldn't have denied it. And this is what the jury ultimately came to, was, yes, maybe he was the main perpetrator, but she was right there with him, aiding him along. And in a lot of ways, this is the case that was never proven against him. The prosecutors got the ability to prove it against her.
All right. Well, Rachel, one more question for you. Let's talk about sentencing here. We knew, throughout all of this, she faced potentially up to 70 years in prison. Obviously, no criminal record up until this point. Kind of walk us through what you predict as far as sentencing here.
I heard the defense team will put on all the evidence that they don't think she was the main perpetrator, that she was in many ways along for the ride. They will show what her background is without any kind of prior convictions, without prior crimes. They will try to make her look like a model citizen, and that she was not the main actor in these events. And they may even show that she was under his spell, or that she didn't do this on her own. As far as the prosecutors go, they will make this look like the sex crime case that it is, that really without her help, that these events could not have happened, that she was convicted of this, that this is child sex trafficking. I mean, this is very major. I don't think she will get a light sentence. This to me feels like she will spend a good amount of time in jail, if not the rest of her life.
And Rachel, one more thing. I have to imagine the defense immediately is going to be filing an appeal here.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I don't see immediately grounds for appeal in this case, but she has a lot of money. Likely she can spend some money on the appeal, of course, but I don't see this as a case that would be overturned.
Rachel Fiset, we appreciate so much you joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your insight.
A crush of media tonight outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. As news broke, the jurors had a verdict on their 6th day of deliberations. Ghislaine Maxwell, who turned 60 behind bars Christmas Day, guilty on all but one of the 6 counts she faced.
A unanimous jury has found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of one of the worst crimes imaginable: facilitating and participating in the sexual abuse of children. Crimes that she committed with her longtime partner and co-conspirator, Jeffrey Epstein.
Epstein died in 2019, taking his own life in jail, awaiting his own sex trafficking trial. As the verdict was read, Maxwell's eyes were expressionless, the rest of her face hidden behind a black mask. Her lawyers say the British socialite was made a scapegoat for crimes committed by her former boyfriend and employer, her brother, in court every day, leaving tonight without making a statement.
What's your backs, guys?
Prosecutors say Maxwell groomed girls as young as 14 to be sexually abused by Epstein. 4 women describing their own exploitation as teenagers at the wealthy financier's lavish homes in Florida, New York, and New Mexico.
The road to justice has been far too long. But today, justice has been done.
The trial lasted a month, deliberations dragging on, the jury recently signaling they were not close to a decision. U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan citing an astronomical spike in New York COVID cases, asking jurors to keep working, even through New Year's Eve, concerned one could become infected with the virus, forcing a mistrial. Maxwell took a risk, declining to testify, saying the government had not met its burden of proof. She now faces a long jail term. Each of the 5 charges carries up to 40 years in prison. In New York, Tom Negevin, News Nation.